Time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Al, it has been quite a week for the world since we last talked about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The same could be said for the Biden administration as it plots its way through this most significant international crisis, probably the worst since World War II. And recent polls seem to have confirmed that the American people are supportive of Biden's management of the war so far, even as voters watch gas prices reach all-time highs. But undoubtedly, oil costs will continue to rise as the conflict continues. And I'm curious if you and Craig feel that this support can last. Is there a certain threshold for economic pain that Americans simply won't tolerate down this hard road? And if so, what are the political ramifications of that shift?
Well, first of all, we have to stipulate that we really don't know what's going to happen in the war. Right now, the American people are just absolutely appalled by the atrocities, by the war crimes they see committed every day by the Russians. And so Americans are solidly behind Ukraine. I think the real hero is President Zelensky, but Americans are really admire the courage of the Ukrainians. And I suspect that as long as this war goes on in the way it is, with the Russians aiming at civilians, shooting at hospitals, finding humanitarian convoys to attack, that as long as all that continues, the support for helping the Ukrainians is going to be great. I actually believe that more than supporting Biden's policies, even though he's done a terrific job of unifying the allies, the American people really just back the Ukrainians in this. I think there are a couple of questions. One is there going to be a point where Americans are going to want to do more? For a lot of people, this reminds them of the beginnings of World War II. And, as I said last week, we're not quite old enough for that, but there is certainly, from everything history tells us, there's a pattern to 1938 and 1939, and the Americans paid a big price for not going in and doing something early. I listen every day to the military experts and the intelligence experts talking about why we can't do a no-fly zone, and now we've blocked the sale of or the gift of Polish MiG jets to the Ukrainians. And I suspect, because we don't want to start World War III, and nobody wants World War III, but on the other hand, do we want to see genocide on our television screens every night? That's a real question. As to the question you asked, I suspect that the protection for Biden and the Democrats is not going to last very long. We had another inflation report today. It was 7.9%, which again is the highest in 4 decades. It just keeps hanging on, going up a little bit. Gas, food, housing, which are the things that affect middle-class voters, were the highest things on the highest items on the inflation list. And if it keeps going up, I think voters are going to take it out on the in party. Craig knows this well, but in campaigns, when we want to try to press an idea, we always have our pollsters do scenarios. And the scenarios are, well, if these atrocities continue, will you pay more for gas? And people say yes to the pollsters, and they get to the polls and they vote no. And we do this in the Democratic Party for all the social programs. Would you like your taxes raised a little bit to, fund this program or that? And the pollsters come back and they say, we got overwhelming majorities for our position. And then people go to the polls and they vote not to pay higher taxes.
Craig, what's your assessment? Do you think the American people will hang with Joe Biden on this tough crisis?
So I'm going to get to my answer to that question, but there's a few points I want to make first. And I start right where Al started, which is we don't know what's going to happen. But I also start with Putin and some remarkable testimony this week by the intelligence community about what they knew and what they believe is happening. And the director of Central Intelligence actually laid out 4 assumptions that Putin made that were just flat out wrong. And think about this. I mean, this is a world leader, a nuclear power, former intelligence official, massive intelligence operation. He thought Ukraine was weak. They're not. He thought Europe would be distracted and not come together as a force against his efforts. That's wrong. He thought he'd prepared the Russian economy for the level of sanctions that would be placed upon Russia. The sanctions are greater and the economy is not ready for it. And he thought he'd modernized his military. And clearly, they're dysfunctional. This is not what I think. This is what the director of our Central Intelligence Operation Agency is saying to Congress. That's just phenomenal. So then you come to this point about not knowing what's going to happen. And I will tell you that in the White House officials, and it starts with the president and vice president, but it runs right through the senior staff. They believe they can control world events. They believe that there's kind of an orbit around that 14-acre complex called the White House, and that they can both discern what's going to happen and also make things happen. And in this case, it's almost impossible when you're dealing with a world leader who himself in Putin doesn't know what's actually happening. And the thing that's most concerning is he has to be taken aback. You get various descriptions of his thinking and attitude, but he also has to come to some conclusion about where the off-ramp is for him. And if he got those first 4 assumptions so wrong, how's he going to sort out where he's going to go from here? As for Biden, President Biden, I do think the administration has done well. As I've said before, I think they've held together the NATO nations, and I think there's an alliance against Russia that's formidable. But think back to what George Herbert Walker Bush did when Iraq went into Kuwait. The phrase "this will not stand" defined what success would look like. The simple phrase. And he didn't tell us how he was going to do it, didn't tell us how we were going to get there, when we were going to get there, but he made clear what success was. And as I watch the news, we're just muddling through, maybe we should send jets, maybe we shouldn't send jets, maybe we should do, more sanctions, fewer sanctions. I think President Biden, as a next step, has to define success, which I think has to include minimizing the loss of life, bringing an end to the fighting, and also minimizing the domestic impact on our country. Whatever his choices are, he needs to lay it out. There's risk in doing that, but he needs to lay it out so that when we achieve those things, we can say that, the mission he laid out has been accomplished. And I think that'll help him. But just to continue kind of meandering through various policy options, I don't think is helping us or focusing the American people on what needs to come next.
Al, going back to your analogy with the run-up to World War II, I have not seen so far that kind of isolationist movement that was so prevalent. America First, I think it was called. And at the same time, I'm seeing Republicans who have been outspoken about at least their respect for Russia are backtracking. So it might be a different circumstance. What's your thought?
The Republicans, I guess I don't trust them to be in any one position very long on this. But there may not be the, sort of upfront isolationism that we had before World War II. I mean, it's almost impossible in today's world to be that isolationist when everybody's driving cars from all over the world, and the laptops we're on are made in 450,000 different countries and all of that. but I don't see any desire for the United States, to go to war. I think it's certainly not to put ground troops in, and but at some point, I think support could build for something like the no-fly zone, because there's just this sort of, I mean, I'm just talking as an ordinary citizen who grew up in Indiana. You sort of say, well, we're just going to sort of keep the air clean, the airspace safe over Ukraine, and they can't bomb and all that. But of course, that's engaging Russian pilots and Russian anti-aircraft. And so it is an act of war, but it seems a little cleaner. I mean, like we did in Bosnia, we didn't put troops on the ground, but we went in and were very successful. The thing that Craig said something that sort of is fascinating to me, and I know he's right, but you hear about what a big failure the Russians are, and Putin's disappointed and all that, and I'm sure all that's true. But at the same time, he's destroying a country and going to win that war. It's not going to, and so I think the question, and it sort of goes back to Dave, what you just were alluding to. The question for us is, when are we going to try to stop this? And are we going to try to stop it by intervening? I mean, what Craig said about Biden is probably right. I mean, we've sort of gone to increasingly tough sanctions, but he sort of does it all in public. And, he considers whether we're going to ban Russian oil and gas for a day, and then he decides to do it. At some point, he's just going to have to say, here's what we want to achieve, and here's the best way to do it. And as I've said before on Fromm and Fuller, the real test of a president is leadership and strength. People admire strength in a president, and so he's better off, even if he makes the wrong judgment initially, saying, here's what we need to do, here's how we're going to do it, and we're not going to mess around, rather than saying, well, we're going to consider this because it's a little tighter puts a little more pressure on Putin. Because I think in the end, people won't respond to that in nearly as much as they would the president just saying, this is we're going to stop this war. We're going to save Ukraine, or whatever his policy is going to be, and we're going to do the best we can to keep Americans from having to pay a heavy price.
Craig, you have the last word this week.
The sad reality is the images coming out of Ukraine are likely to get worse unless Putin really has a change of heart. There's no sign that's going to happen in soon. And this is all happening, obviously not in a vacuum. And I looked at one of those sets of numbers that Al and I always like to look at, right direction, wrong track. And the most recent early March numbers have right direction 38%, wrong track 62%. Now these numbers they don't vary widely, they're not big swings. But when you get right direction below 40, you end up with the party in power having political challenges. And so the combination of a long drawn out engagement in Ukraine and the foreign policy stories that are constantly bombarding us, along with economic difficulties at home, as fuel prices go up, and you're reading more and more stories about everyday people seeing their fuel costs going up and their prices going up. That is not going to move the right direction, wrong track numbers in a direction that is going to be favorable to the party in power, the Democrats, come November. And I'm really coming back around to the initial question you asked, because just prosecuting this foreign policy initiative in Europe, just getting through Ukraine is not going to be enough. And I think the story is going to get worse. It's going to get worse there, and it's going to get worse at home, which is why I come back to having to kind of educate people on what success is going to be like, and figuring out how to move to a better place as quickly as possible. Most of all, I go back to what Al said. I think the heroic efforts by a leader in Ukraine and by the Ukrainian people are something we all have to marvel at, and they may have more control over this than anybody sitting in Washington, D.C., and maybe even the fellow sitting in Russia.
We'll have to end it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We'll see you next week.